trouble with audio or video, please just raise your hand as we go, and we'll reset and make sure we address that. So as you can see, today's topic is 3 ways to transform your organization into a performance-driven culture. And we're going to spend the next few moments describing and talking about our solution for data capture and how a specific client of ours has utilized our technology to actually transform their organization. In addition to that, at the end of the session, we're actually going to open the application and show you how it works. So we'll show you what the application looks like for somebody clocking and recording data against the system so that you can see what the current version of the software looks like. And as Shannon mentioned, we've also reserved time at the end to address any questions or comments that you have. So please, by all means, as we go along, please type those questions in, and we'll save time for that. This event should take 30-35 minutes, so we'll get you folks back to your day here pretty quickly. And Shannon, we're picking up a little background noise from somebody typing, so make sure we've got everybody muted. So just by way of background, AboutTime is a technology company. We've been in existence now for almost 13 years, and we really set out initially to solve the challenge of gathering information from construction job sites back to the office. And as a consequence, we've built a mobile-based, mobile being mobile computing or mobile phone, mobile tablet computer, and so forth, based solution that allows for the gathering of that data very automatically through clock-ins and clock-outs and note recording and so forth, photograph recording on the device. And as a consequence, we have won a number of awards from industry leaders, industry publications, and so forth. We're highly regarded in the construction space for very innovative technology. So just, of course, we're very proud of our accomplishments and our history. We would not have much to talk about if not for our clients. We have a number of companies today that use our solution. We've implemented over 1,500 companies across North America in using our solution to capture data from their job sites. And we'll be happy to share more detailed stories with you and follow-up conversations and so forth with you. So in beginning the process for us, we're really the result of a couple of construction individuals, construction professionals, getting together and deciding to solve this problem. So we really start first as construction people, and then employ technology to solve the issue or solve the data demand. And first and foremost in our minds, and what we consider with every iteration and every version of our software, is keeping the application simple in the field or from the job site for collection of data. So you'll see as we clock in and clock out with the application, we've kept it very straightforward and very simple for individuals to record their activities and record their clock-ins and so forth from the device. However, the information becomes very powerful back in the office, and you'll see that it's actually real-time data. So in the office, you're seeing and recording what people are doing through the course of the day, when they're clocking in, where they're clocking in, and so forth, what forms have been submitted, such as daily logs, incident reports, and so forth. And all of that information is shared with and integrated with your in-place business system. So data entry really becomes a thing of the past. We're recording the information very automatically. So in our DNA is simple in the field, powerful in the office, and we adhere to that very, very aggressively today. So when we talk about our solution, there are a number of components, and of course, you hear us referring to increasing efficiency and accuracy of data and so forth. The type of information we collect revolves around time information, so clock in and clock out information for employees, productivity data such as production units placed today, and actual production units against estimated production units, asset information, so tracking things like your pieces of equipment and your toolboxes and so forth. So we have the ability to record where your equipment is and who's using it. And we also, as I've mentioned, gather form information and note information. So various types of data that are important to you. I mentioned before daily logs, daily reports, and things of that nature. You'll see some examples of forms that we've helped some of our clients design but we want you to understand as well, you get to determine the types of forms and the types of data that you get to collect. And the last thing we point out is our data integrates with your other business systems, your payroll system, your accounting system, your human resources system, and so forth, so that we are truly eliminating the data entry portion of the equation and allowing your team to record information automatically, have the ability to review it, assess it, correct it if necessary, and then, of course, update that information without having to key it in time and time again. So in addition, when we talk about that information being gathered, we talk about productivity metrics and the types of information that are important to you. So when we're gathering clock-ins, we are able to share the productivity expectations back to the device. And we're one of the few, if not only, software tools that allow data to be shared back to the device for your crew leaders. So if your foreman, if your superintendents have the need to see number of production units expected, number of hours expected to perform that task, you organizationally get to choose how they see that, if they see that, when they see that, and so forth. And we're also going to talk about the adoption of a system like this. One of the biggest questions we get when we talk about our solution is, hey, that looks really good. It looks like a very powerful solution, but how do we convince our people to use it? And how do we gain adoption and use of it in a very, very efficient way? And we've got a pretty good story to tell behind one of our clients and how they were able to make that transition very, very quickly. So to the point of accuracy, with real-time tracking, with a device, a phone, a smartphone, or a tablet computer, when information is recorded, the device already knows a number of things. It knows where it is, so it's using geolocationing to identify where that device is when somebody is clocking in, when they're clocking out, and so forth. We offer the ability to track what we call employee authentication. So you'll see me key in actually using PIN codes here in a little while. So I'm just going to type in a 4-digit PIN code to identify myself as different employees. However, there are a number of ways to authenticate who an employee is. So one example of that would be fingerprint or biometric authentication. Our solution supports that type of tracking. Our solution also supports facial scanning. So we have the ability to take photographs of our employees as they clock in and clock out, again, validating that they are who they say they are. Even through the use of what are called proximity cards or scan cards, you have the ability to issue to your employees a card identifying themselves that they can use to clock in and clock out. And of course, it's through this type of entry that we reduce errors. We're not having to confront a paper timesheet any longer. We're not having to concern ourselves with somebody filling that paper timesheet out at the end of the week, trying to remember what they did yesterday, let alone last week. And of course, in serving up the data, we allow you to control what the employees see on the device. So if I am responsible for clocking into a particular location or job, and if I am a carpenter, for example, I'm only going to see the job that's relevant to me. I'm only going to see the cost codes that are relevant to me. So I'm only allowed to clock into those things that make sense for me. And you have that ability, again, organizationally, to control what people see. And as we mentioned, we're going to integrate with your other systems. And what that really means is, from your accounting system, from your job cost system, from your payroll system, and so forth, we're able to download your data to our software and to your devices so that you don't have to rekey information when you implement. If you set up a new employee in payroll, that data, that employee, is then transmitted to our system automatically. And that also means that at the end of the pay week, when we have our time capture complete, we have the ability to send that data electronically over to your payroll system for payroll processing, again, eliminating that data entry. So, of course, efficiencies. Our clients come back and tell us time and time again about the efficiencies gained, the reduction in process, the reduction in data entry. And we do I'll say this, we refer to ourselves as tree huggers. Our solution very much can reduce and even eliminate the use of paper in many cases. One of the questions that drives, of course, as we use a smartphone to clock in and clock out, and we have the ability to validate time and validate employees and so forth on the device, do we really have to print at all? And can your system print if we want it to? And so it very much is a paperless system. However, you do have the opportunity to print and validate any of the data that we collect. So you can, if you choose, still print daily, weekly, and monthly timesheets, audit reports in terms of who was on the job site, who was not on the job site, and so forth. But of course, this data is produced in a much more timely fashion. We don't have to wait for it. And one of the big values of our solution is we're able to drive information now on an almost instantaneous basis. So we don't have to wait until the next week to run payroll and know where we are relative to estimated versus actual hours on our projects and on our tasks or cost codes. So better information much more quickly. You'll see as I clock in momentarily that it's, as I mentioned before, meant to be very simple for the employee on the job site. We use large buttons, we use very obvious buttons. We use as our example an ATM machine. We pattern ourselves after the ability to step up to the software or step up to the machine and withdraw cash with my ATM card or clock into AboutTime. So we make the navigation very simple, and you'll see that you have an ability organizationally to define what your employees will see on the device. So if I'm only supposed to clock myself in, that is the only capability I will have, and that's all that I'm going to see. If I'm a superintendent or foreman and responsible for clocking in a crew, I'll have the ability to see those individuals that I should be able to clock in and clock out. And that's true of other information as well, things like forms and so forth. So you have very much the ability to restrict what people see on the devices, and we keep it simple in that way. So I mentioned before, we're going to talk just a little bit about a current client of ours, and this is a case study of a company called Phoenix Petroleum. Phoenix Petroleum is actually a general contractor, but they serve the petroleum industry. They actually work in Eastern Canada, and they have a very interesting story to tell. So as a company, they have been enjoying tremendous success over the last number of years. As we've all seen, up until the last couple of months at the gas pump, oil prices were up and or high. That was good for businesses like this. And being in Eastern Canada, their challenges were around keeping their employees engaged, retaining their employees in a very, very competitive marketplace, recognizing which of their employees were high producers and which ones weren't, so that they could build programs around retaining those people and so forth. But as a company, they've enjoyed a strong economy for a lot of years. So their challenges have been maybe a little bit different than some of your companies. So one of the things that they were concerned with is in implementing a system, the turnaround of information. So they were very much a paper-based company. They operate in far Eastern Canada, out as far as Newfoundland, but all the way across Canada as well, far out to the west, as well as in the Caribbean. So they have a number of actual operating units and do work at a number of client sites, refinery locations, storage locations, and so forth, really anything serving the petroleum industry. So turnaround time for information was a big issue for them. Collecting paper timesheets, which is what they were doing before, getting those back to the office via fax, via courier, and so forth, and then getting that data entered and turned into payroll. So they wanted to eliminate paper. Another byproduct that we don't always think about when we think about time collection information and gathering data on devices is turning information around for billings. So one of their larger requirements is validation of employee hours on job sites for a lot of their billing documents. That was in the past up to a 3-week process. So again, they were couriering or packaging information in paper, sending it back to the office for turnaround, and finally getting that out in paper form to their clients. So what they've found in using our system, and they implemented just about a year and a half ago, so just over a year ago, they've reduced their cost in the first year by over $400,000 from a process of shipping and, frankly, getting their hours more accurate. They've reduced their billing turnaround from 2 weeks down to 2 days. And they've reduced their payroll processing time down from 2 days to 3 hours. So as you can imagine, their payroll costs, their direct payroll costs and processing costs have been reduced by a very, very large margin. The owner absolutely insists by 20%. And so it's been a very strong success story. They're very strong advocates of our solution. One of the things that we've talked to the owner about very directly, though, and this is part of our subject matter today, and that is, how do you get employees to adopt and adapt to a system like this? Well, one of the challenges, as I mentioned, that they've had enjoying a robust marketplace for a number of years is really realizing and recognizing their good employees, their top producers. So having the ability to gain information every day, getting clock-ins and clock-outs and field reports and productivity reports really allows them to get that data and recognize their top performers, and their retention rates have gone way up. So they're able to really communicate well with those people, offer them perhaps some perks or some components to their compensation plan that high achievers should get. And it's been a very, very strong piece of their environment and their culture since they've implemented AboutTime. A very, very positive story there. And so as we've talked, and when we look at the core of our system, and of course it's in our name, AboutTime, the first thing that we built our system to do is to collect time data, collect clock-ins and clock-outs. And it is a real-time system. And in doing so, what we find, and again, Phoenix Petroleum and others of our clients have shared this with us, that they reduce their, what I call do-overs. They're having to cut a second check for an employee after the fact, because when the employee receives their check and they say, well, you missed 2 of my hours, or you missed some of my time from last week, they've absolutely eliminated that because they're getting real-time data and they're sharing with their employees those hours before they even go to payroll processing. Even with the reduction in time, they're able to accomplish that, and they've absolutely eliminated having to cut those second checks. So processing errors, the time involved and so forth has really been a savings, and we hear that from many of our clients. Now, the other thing we'll point out is in processing payroll, we very much collect data real time. It works very, very well, but some of our clients will share with us, we don't want to necessarily start that way. We would much prefer to kind of walk before we run. And so we offer an ability through our solution to collect what we call after the fact or digital time, which means an employee can open the device, the phone or the tablet computer, and enter their time worked for the day. So you have the ability to configure our solution to really work in the most effective way for your environment. Now, I've mentioned this a little bit, but we're going to drill into a little bit more detail here. We talk about right people, right place, right time. As you can see, what that means is we know where the jobs are. The jobs are actually geolocated based upon information within the job data, meaning we know the job address. So our system geolocates the job. Our system has the ability to geolocate the device. If we have somebody clocking in the wrong place, you're going to know it. That person's supervisor is going to know that. So you have the ability to make those corrections. Maybe you've had an employee show up on the wrong job, right? They told him where to go tomorrow, or next day, sure enough, he clocks in the wrong place, and all kinds of alarm bells go off. We drive notifications around that. So if somebody's clocking in from the wrong place, that person's supervisor or project manager is going to know that. And you have the ability to real-time correct those behaviors. I mentioned before facial authentication, actually taking the photograph while people clock in so we know that it's the right person. And then you'll see that we have the ability for the employee and or the supervisor or foreman to sign off on that time, those clock ins and clock outs at the end of the day. So we get validation real time. The solution allows for people to clock in and clock out and clock in to multiple locations in a day. So if you have employees that move between locations and maybe they don't carry their own smartphone, but they're clocking in on a foreman's device at the next job, that's okay as well. So we really tried to make the system as flexible from a clock in, clock out, clock to travel time, if you would like basis, and offer you organizationally the ability to record that information. And then a piece of our solution, as I mentioned before, is the management of assets. So managing equipment and tools and vehicles. So we have the ability to identify and allow entry of data against a vehicle, maybe mileage or a piece of equipment, a front loader or a backhoe, having the ability to enter meter readings, which job it's being used on, how many hours it was used in the day and so forth, so that we are able to find things more readily, right? Where was this last used? Who last had it? Who was the last operator on it? We have the ability to accumulate costs for that equipment. So if you bill for it or cost for it against your jobs, that data is much, much more automatically maintained. We even have the ability to affix barcode readers to your equipment so that the likelihood of theft or loss is greatly reduced. And many of our clients will actually use the system not just for their larger assets like equipment and vehicles, but also for small tools, toolboxes, and so forth. So you can make the assignments per location and per job. We can identify which employee has this toolbox. So if things do turn up missing, we have that a better opportunity to find things. I've mentioned to some degree productivity as well. So we're collecting time, but we're also collecting the number of production units in place. So you have the ability to ask that question upon clock out of your employees. So not only do we know how many estimated hours we have on a job and on a cost code, we have the actual hours. And we're recording that data as we go. You'll also see that we're able to record, as I mentioned before, form and notes data in addition to photographs. One of the wonderful things that we've been able to participate in is the technology in the last 13 years has become much more common, meaning more people are carrying much more powerful devices. When we started life back 13 years ago, we worked on Palm Pilots. For those of you that remember, they were pretty cool technology 13 years ago. However, you're not going to see too many people carrying those around today. Today, the devices have cameras. The devices have the ability to program for notes and voice recognition and so forth. So we have a very, very efficient tool for gathering data using what the devices do very, very well. And then, of course, that productivity reporting. So we record it on the device. It lands back in the office in reports, so you'll see it. And again, it's landing as it's happening, so we don't have to wait until that piece of paper comes in later in the week or next week. And this is just a screen that depicts what that looks like on the phone. So labor budgeted hours versus actual hours, production units, estimated versus actual production units, and then the actual productivity. So percent completes and units in place. And again, we can show that on the device if you choose to communicate that with your field personnel. And then, of course, this ensures better documentation. So we're able to manage that information with GPS. One of the things that I haven't mentioned yet is that we automatically log weather conditions on jobs. So weather reporting manually becomes a thing of the past. That data, because we know the job location is being landed based on weather.com. So we know the temperature, we know the wind speed and so forth, very automatically, again, eliminating a piece of information that we don't have to enter anymore. And of course, this all results in real-time visibility. What's going on the job right now? Much more information, much more readily available, and much more automated. I've also mentioned the collection of what we call forms data, but you're going to see, we'll use some examples as we open the device here momentarily, the ability to enter forms of your design. So that daily log becomes automated. It lands in the office without us having to worry about the piece of paper coming back. That's very much a streamlining, if you will, of process and data bottlenecks and so forth. We don't have to worry about, did that incident report come in from our superintendent? Did that get to our safety director? Did that get to the project executive team? We route that information automatically. The safety director receives it automatically via email. And one of the things you're going to see is we can capture signatures. So in addition to photographs, if we have a foreman signature or even a customer signature on a document, we offer the ability to capture that from the device. And so we use this example, and this is actually a real-life example for us. The name has been changed to protect the innocent. We call our sample data more often than not All-American Construction. But we had a client implement a form that was very inclusive, prompting for labor hours, who worked on the job, prompting for equipment and tools used, as well as materials used. Well, today this customer gathers all of this information via a screen. So we don't have to worry about trying to read the words that are kind of scribbled in and so forth. This data is being prompted for and captured and then reproduced, printable, as I mentioned before, at any point in time in a much cleaner format. And so this is what the fields look like in gathering the data. The output is very much automated. You see some questions here. What day of the week? What is the date? Safety problems, a yes/no question. So you have the ability to ask the questions in a very orderly way in the field format that you would choose, which also ensures that the data is in its correct format when it comes back. So that data is much more readily gathered. And then I've mentioned it before. We won't drill in on this in too much detail right now, but we will integrate with your other systems, your accounting solutions and so forth. And again, what that means is we're not having to rekey data. The data is landing via the device back in the office. You're reviewing it and then identifying when it's ready to go. So when is that time data ready to be handed off to your accounting system? And we do. We integrate with all of the leading systems in the construction space. So at this point in time, we get to have a little bit of fun with the device. So as you can see on your screen, I've opened on an iPad the AboutTime application. And the application is now waiting for me to identify myself. And as I mentioned before, I'm using PIN code, so I can identify myself using a 4-digit code. You'll also see right up here, the system can prompt me for a barcode. So if I have one of those RFID cards that I mentioned before, or barcode cards that I mentioned before, you can simply scan it and the system will identify the employee. However, in my case, I'm not using fingerprint recognition, I'm not using barcodes. I'm simply going to tap a code and that's going to identify myself. So if I tap 1111, you'll notice a couple of things going on. I'm identified as a person named Daniel Bodie. My date and time is stamped here. I'm assigned to a project, and yes, what you see is my camera's in vogue. So I apologize for this. It's not Brad Pitt this morning, it's me. But I'm going to go ahead and clock myself in and accept that time, having used facial recognition. So the system very automatically prompts for that information upon clock in. So Daniel Bodie was set up with a pre-selected job. Somebody else is responsible for identifying his cost code. He simply has to get to that job and clock in and validate that he's who he says he is. Now, as a different example, I'm going to tap 2222. I'm a different employee now. I'm Sarah Rollins. Sarah's associated with the same job. However, you'll notice she has a couple of buttons here. Sarah can select a different location, so she can go ahead and tap that button and say, well, I'm on First Avenue High School this morning, and I'm going to go ahead and clock in using the green button. And what am I working on? Am I working on demolition, finished carpentry? You can see the list. Even the ability to clock to things like lunch and travel. Those are things that we can either allow you to capture automatically, or you can have your employees clock to. Well, let's go ahead and put her to work hanging chipboard and accept. So you've seen two examples of individuals clocking themselves in very, very simply by identifying themselves. And just a couple more examples here. I'm now going to identify myself as Larry Baker, and I can go ahead and set location. And again, I can pick from my list if I choose to. We'll go ahead and go to work on Capitol Park Lofts. you'll notice what happens now. So his cost codes are slightly different than the ones we saw for Sarah a moment ago. And we'll go ahead and go to work installing masonry units and accept that time in, right? So slightly different clock in based upon who I identified myself as. Now, one more example using the device, and this is an example of a crew leader. So now I'm Tim Coella, and when I clock in, instead of just clocking myself in, I have a crew assigned to me. And so I can identify all of those individuals on my crew with the check boxes, which I already have. I can clock myself in. I can even choose from additional employees and equipment to assign to my crew if I choose to. So if I've got additional people working on my crew, I can go ahead and select those, or I can go ahead and say, let's clock in. So we'll stay with the same location, the same job, and what are we working on today? So we'll work on some masonry restoration and cleaning and go ahead and accept that time. So the experience was slightly different for Tim Coella because he's identified as a crew leader. So he has the responsibility of clocking additional people in. And so you can define who your crew leaders are, what information they have available, if they're responsible for clocking other people in. And as you can see, a great variety of information. So as Tim Coella, as a manager, I have location information available to me, things like location budget. So if I want to see my budgets versus actuals on this job and so forth, much like you saw on my screen a moment ago. I have employee data available to me. Now remember, you get to control this, so you do not have to make that available, but some of our clients want their managers to be able to select from their employees, see additional data. Hey, has this individual passed a certain certification, right? Do I want the foreman to make that decision from the job site, yes or no? So some of our clients have made that election, and you'll notice that I can enter field notes and so forth, but I'm going to go ahead and drop right into FORMSXPRESS. So remember, I've mentioned this a couple of times, and my screen is lagging there, so I'm going to go ahead and jump start it a little bit here. FORMSXPRESS, here we go. So what you'll see on your screen now is I've designed a number of examples of forms that our clients have requested, and what's important to understand about FORMSXPRESS is they are designable. These are not hardwired into the software. You get to design your own. We teach you how to do it. We will design them with you. But they represent, as you can see, a daily log. I've got a change order here, a checklist report. I've got an incident report and so forth. So I've got a number of different examples representing kind of different workflows. So if I look at this particular one, the weekly toolbox talk, and we built this in conjunction with a client of ours that had some very specific needs. And I think the subject of toolbox talks is a pretty familiar one to most construction firms today. We have to teach our people through specific subject matter, and the subject changes from week to week, but we have to validate that all of our employees receive this training. So we can't just kind of make it up and hope for the best. We have to validate who's in attendance and so forth. So on this job, the Capital Park Loss that I'm logged into, and I'm logged into the task masonry restoration, but the system's pre-filled with the date and the time. The device knows how to do that very well. If I have to override something like that, I can say, well, yeah, we had this meeting a couple of hours ago. I'm just filling in the form now. Who's the foreman on the job? So I can go ahead and fill in that information simply by keying it in, and I save myself the trouble of typing anything too challenging on the device, but we'll go ahead and identify that. What type of crew do we have on the job today? Well, we'll say it's a masonry crew. And how many people do I have in the crew? So you'll notice right away, I've got a numeric box that comes up instead of the ability to type in text. And I have that ability now to start typing in things like subject matter, this week's operations, ways to eliminate any hazards that we've identified and so forth. And so I can type those in, or I can use the voice recognition on my device to fill this information in to make that much more automatic. But this client came up with what I thought was a very creative way to validate their entire crew's attendance. So they take a photograph of their attendee list with name printed and signed, but they also take photographs of their employees. So they'll have everybody line up and take photographs. They'll have upwards of 30 to 40 people in a crew in a day. So they take the photographs, and then of course, foreman signs the thing. So we go ahead and fill that in. By saving that form, it will automatically synchronize back to the office. It lands in the office. It's available to anybody that should see it, and it's printable and reviewable at any point in time in the future. It's stored forever. Now, just to counterpoint that a little bit, I've designed an incident report here, and I apologize. I'm sure some of you are looking at reports saying, well, call this one up or call that one up. We'll be happy to do that by scheduling a subsequent meeting specifically with your company. But in this case, if we've had an injury, again, date and time, name of injured person, nature of the injury, and so forth, take photographs if appropriate, what action was taken, did we have to call 911, yes or no, and again, supervisor signature. So a very, very specific form. I'm not going to go ahead and say that one, but forms are designable to prompt for the fields in the order that you want to see those fields come up. So you're asking for information in a very specific format and controlling the resultant data that comes back to the office. Now, the last thing I'd like to do with the device is our friend Larry Baker has worked, worked a full day. I think he clocked in about 5 minutes ago. It's time to clock out. So Larry Baker opens the device, taps the red button, and he's prompted with a couple of questions. Larry, did you get hurt on the job today? Yes or no? I'll say no. And I certify that I was given appropriate meal periods and breaks on this workday. We'll say yes to that. What that illustrates is the ability within our system for you to prompt your employees. So again, you get to control that messaging. Prompt your employees for the type of information that you would like to receive from them at the end of the day. You can ask as many questions as you'd like. You can prompt for that information. That data, again, is landing back in your office automatically. So that's what I wanted to illustrate with the device today. Thank you so much. We will welcome you to contact us about scheduling specific meetings so that we can talk about your issues in your environment. But for now, we'd like to ask if you have any questions about what we've gone through. Shannon?
Thanks, Marty. We had a question. Can you tell us a little bit about the alerts and triggers?
Sure. So in our system, we actually built it, of course, to capture all of this data, and I've said it before, we capture it, we keep it forever. It goes back to your office on your server. We also built with our system an alert and notification system, which allows you to identify what actions and what events in the system should automatically trigger a notification. And then that will also allow you to define who should get the notification. So the example I use is if an incident report is filled out on a device and is synchronized back to the office, the safety director should automatically get an alert about that and should receive that notification, right? So should receive that document. That's an example. Shannon? Shannon, is your mute button on?
Yes, I was trying to be very quiet. Sorry about that. Let's see. We had a question that says, do you have an approval process for time records prior to the handoff for accounting? So is there...
Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Yes. So we have the ability, and again, within the system, organizationally, you get to decide how many approvals you have and who is responsible for those. So if you want the employee to sign off on their own time, if you want the employee supervisor to sign off on that time, you can also identify a couple of other levels of employee within your organization. You get to define the roles, and you get to define the workflows and the approval in the system. Yes, very much so. Thank you for that question.
Okay, we have another question that came in, and it says, do you report on productivity with units of measure, or how do you report on that?
That is correct. So we use production units. So of course we gather labor typically in hours or days, but for your production reporting, we use units of measure. So how many lineal feet of curb and gutter did we pour today? How many squares of carpeting were installed and so forth. So you have the ability to identify the production units for your line items. That data, by the way, automatically downloads from your job cost system to AboutTime. And then we're allowing you to have your employees fill that in on the device and send that back to your job cost system.
Okay, we have another question that says, how are employees and jobs set up in your software? Would I have to manually key them in to start the system?
Terrific. So the answer to that is no. We actually download that data directly from your job cost and accounting system. So on the prior slide, we integrate with every leading construction accounting system out there, as well as others. So it's very, very easy for us to help you set this up so that you're receiving that data automatically and not having to key it into our system.
Okay, we have one last question.
Oh, very good.
And it's about, can employees clock in on their own phones, or does it have to be company equipment, or do they have the ability to clock in on someone else's phone?
Thank you for asking that. Yes, and I somewhat ignored that piece of it, and I apologize for that. So a couple of notes about devices. Yes, employees can clock in on their own device. So that can mean one of two things. Either the company has issued them a phone, or they have their own phone and you allow them to use it. So some companies have what's called a bring your own device policy. So employees can use their own phones if you want to allow them to. Another option is, and many companies will say, well, our superintendents have phones and tablets, but our employees don't. Can employees clock in using a superintendent's or a foreman's device? And the answer is yes. So multiple people can clock in on the same device. So you have the ability to either have individuals clocking themselves in on their own device or clocking in on a foreman's device, or you have that foreman or superintendent clocking them in. And just one more note about devices. In the modern era, 2015, Apple and Android are the most commonly used by a huge margin today devices. So we run on all of the current Apple and Android devices, phones and tablet computers. Oftentimes we get the question, which is best, which is your favorite? We don't choose favorites. They're both good environments. Every company gets to make that decision, and oftentimes, you know, the real question is, how big a screen do you really need? Well, if we're filling out forms and such, we may want a little bit larger screen. If we're simply clocking time, phone screens work really well, but generally that's a personal preference. So individuals can clock themselves in, foremen can clock their crews in, devices can be shared, or individual devices can be used in Apple and Android. And we'd welcome the opportunity to meet with you individually and talk about the types of technology you have in place today and how you might use our solution.
Okay, with that, we don't have any other questions. We just want to thank everyone for their time today. And if you do have any additional questions, feel free to, the email, follow-up emails will, come from us, and we'll give you a copy of the recording of this to share with your colleagues in the PowerPoint. And is there any closing remarks you'd like to make, Marty?
No, Shannon, I think we're good. Everybody, thank you for your attendance, and we'd love to hear from you. Enjoy the day.